a brief review of part 1. So we're going to pick up where we left off, family, but we're going to do a little brief review of part 1 so that we can make sure we have certain things cleared up and, mapped out. So we discussed the Neanderthal genome in light of the modern humans who left Africa and admixed with them, first in the Middle East and then other parts of Eurasia. We highlighted the Upper Paleolithic, Late Stone Age period, which began 50,000 years ago. We highlighted the Upper Paleolithic cultures alongside archeogenetic finds, bones remains to establish a chronology timeline to track the different phases of mutations, migrations, and degeneration of the Eurasians. Now this is very, very important because we're going to pick up where we left off in the Upper Paleolithic and continue to follow this timeline. What we proved so far? We proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Eurasian macrohaplogroup F was the father of all male Eurasian descendants today and their respective haplogroups. Okay, so that was very important that we highlighted that in the presentation. We proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that macrohaplogroup F is the progenitor of all of the male descendants of the Eurasians today, walking around in the so-called Middle East, in Western Eurasia, in Asia Minor, in Central Asia, Northern Russia, Siberia, East Asia, Southeast Asia. The Native Americans also is a part of that, which is going to play a huge role in this segment of the presentation. So we're going to get into that. So we proved that indigenous Africans originated in Africa and carried none of the Eurasian genetic markers that derive from macrohaplogroup F. So that's very key. We proved that. We prove indigenous Africans are the only people on Earth with zero Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA until recent contact with Eurasians and their offsprings. So this is very, very important. So these are the things that is a summation of part 1, which we discussed, and we're going to get even more in depth in this particular part concerning the human genome as it relates to the female, because we're now going to be dealing with the mitochondrial haplogroups in light of the woman that gave rise to these varying mutations that's responsible for the Eurasian females. And what we're going to prove in this part is that the black African woman, our beloved sisters that has been relegated to the bottom of society in every way, shape, or form we could possibly think of, she is set apart, she's unique, and we're going to get into some of the specificities of her uniqueness and what makes her divine and what makes her beautiful, not just in a mundane physical way, but also in a spiritual and cosmological way. So we're going to be covering a lot of grounds in this part. It's even going to be more extensive than part 1, because part 1 we were just getting warmed up, we were just teasing a little bit. So we're going to get really in depth in this part and close out in this part with a bang. So let's begin, ladies and gentlemen. Human mitochondrial DNA can be divided into genealogical groups sharing a common maternal ancestor. These are called haplogroups, which we discussed in part 1, but we're going to go over it again right here. And they are used in population genetics to trace back prehistorical population movements. Macrohaplogroup L. So we're here back again, Wikipedia. In human mitochondrial genetics, L is the mitochondrial DNA macrohaplogroup that is at the root of the human mtDNA phylogenetic tree. As such, it represents the most ancestral mitochondrial lineage of all currently living modern humans. Macrohaplogroup L's origin is connected with mitochondrial Eve. Now, mitochondrial Eve is going to come up a lot, and thus is believed to suggest an ultimate African origin of modern humans. Its major subclades include L0, L1, L2, L3, L4, L5, and L6. With all non-Africans exclusively descended from just haplogroup L3. Now, we're going to highlight that, okay? So keep that in mind. With all non-Africans exclusively descended from just haplogroup L3. Haplogroup M or haplogroup N, and both these macrohaplogroups are simply sub-branches of haplogroup L3. So what does this mean? Just like how we were dealing with macrohaplogroup F, that gave rise to all the Eurasian males today, We also had a genetic drift concerning the mitochondrial haplogroup L3 that's responsible for all non-African female women that's living today. Now highlight this family because this is very, very important for this particular segment. So we're looking at a publication from nature.com. Figure 5, Human Population Migrations in Major mtDNA Haplogroups. From the Dynamics of Mitochondrial DNA Heteroplasmy, Implications for Human Health and Diseases. So as you can see, we're looking at another chart. You can see L3 right there in Africa. It had a genetic drift that gave rise to haplogroup N and M. M split off into Eastern Asia and gave rise to the oceanic populations and had a different origin from us. So you're looking at that chart right here. So in the same article, we're going to read, two more haplogroups M and N arose from the African haplogroup L3 65,000 to 70,000 years before present to populate the rest of the world. As humans migrated, haplogroup N was directed to Eurasia and haplogroup M lineages was moved to Asia like we discussed, giving rise to the macrohaplogroups A, B, C, D, G, and F. This is on the maternal line now, so you have its own subclades composition A, B, C, D, G, and F. In Europe, haplogroup N. So there's a distinction between haplogroup M, which gave rise to the East Asian, Southeast Asian populations, but they also carry these foreign out of Africa hybrid markers. Likewise, the Western Eurasians in the Middle East, in Northeast Europe, in Western Siberia, in Russia, etc., etc., etc. They all share the same genetic markers family. So it says in Europe, haplogroup N led to haplogroup R, which is the root of the European haplogroups H, J, T, U, and V, which emerged 39,000, 51,000 years before present. Haplogroup S, P, and Q are found in Australasia and were formed 48,000 years before present. And haplogroups A, B, C, and D arose 20,000 years before present and populated East Asia and the Americas. So you're looking at another map, and here you see more specifically haplogroup L3 in the yellow highlight. You see it branched off, it giving rise to haplogroup M going towards East Asia, and then you have N going towards West Eurasia. So these are the people that's in Europe today that carry the N marker. They descend from mitochondrial haplogroup N, which is a macro haplogroup in its own right. Likewise, macrohaplogroup M is a macrohaplogroup in its own right. So here we're going to look at the actual phylogenetic tree for all of the mitochondrial haplogroup of the African woman. So we have mitochondrial Eve, we have L0, and L0 gave rise to L1, L2, L4, L5, and L6. Then you have the genetic drift that occurred with L3. So L3 is still a part of this family. So it's very important to keep that in mind and to note that L3 still belongs to the African and indigenous macro haplogroup L family. However, there was a genetic drift that occurred that deleted all the genes that was part of this whole hybridization that took place in the Middle East or the Near East, which gave rise to haplogroup M and N. And then from N, again, we're dealing with the East Asian groups. D, E, G, Q, C, Z, and then from N you have A, I, S, W, X, Y, almost spells out Asia or Asia, and then from R you get B, F, P, UK. So you could go over this family. This is an extensive phylogenetic chart showing the actual lineages that branched off and broken off, showing the deletion genes that gave rise to those particular subclades of macrohaplogroup M and N, which is considered non-African haplogroups on the mitochondrial line. So a lot of you might be confused. So to break it down simply, what we're looking at is that haplogroup L3 gave rise to haplogroup M and N outside of Africa in the so-called Middle East. Through that hybridization process that was going on, the abominations that was taking place with the admixture of Neanderthals, there was a lot of implications concerning the genome of those particular individuals that were involved in those particular activities. So they mutated and split off from us from that L3. It split from L3. Then we had N and M, the descendants. Then that split, and N gave rise to the European groups, or the West Eurasians, the so-called Asiatics, okay, which is responsible for the so-called Asiatic black man. And then from the so-called Asiatic black man, he gave rise to the modern Europeans, or West Eurasians, which is responsible for the destruction of black African civilization. So now you know all the people that's been worshiping these Asiatics, that's been claiming Asiatic origins, that's been claiming they come from Mesopotamia, that's been claiming they come from India, that's been claiming they come from Mount Ararat or Turkey. Now you know where this is coming from. They're actually claiming the enemy of black African people, and whatever religious doctrine or movement they follow, they're all being deceived, because the people they're claiming to be their ancestors were actually the enemies of their own damn enslaved ancestors. So here we're looking at the beautiful woman of Mother Africa. My sisters out there, you guys are set apart, and the genetic and scientific data shows and proves that. So we're looking at the variant African woman of haplogroup L0, L1, L2, L3, L4, L5, and L6. You guys genetically have an affinity for each other. This is why you guys have such a strong vibrational frequency that gravitates you guys towards each other, because you guys are connected even on the genetic level, which in turn reflects what is proven and shown and exposed on the spiritual level. All right, so the African woman, again, there's 7 distinct haplogroups that sets her apart from every woman in the world. Look at that, family. All of these women of Africa, all of these variant faces of Africa, that's all indigenous to Africa and its great diversity of Africa, are genetically connected to each other. Our people, on the other hand, in the diaspora, in the Americas, in Europe, and elsewhere where we've been scattered, our people specifically carry the branches of L2 and then L3. However, we're binded together with our foremothers with all of the other branches of haplogroup L. Again, family, haplogroup L sets our black African woman apart from everybody else on the planet. And this is not by chance. This is all by design, by the Creator. The Creator has set these sisters apart. So this is why she's so powerful. This is why she's so strong and resilient, because all she's been through, she's still here supporting us and standing by us. And it's up to us to make sure that we continue her genetic continuity and her genetic affinity by making the environment conducive for her to flourish and grow. So the African woman, family, as you can see, we cannot make none of this stuff up. The DNA science today is bearing out who we are as a people, how we're set apart from these Eurasians, even on the maternal side and the paternal side. None of us indigenous Africans have anything to do with those Eurasian groups at all. We're set apart from them, and our genes bears that out as a collective Afurakan, Afurakai people.
Because I prayed for an angel, and I've been blessed by the Most High. Like a fairy tale, happily ever after never dies. The simplicity of your actions really opened my eyes, yeah. You're the one I've been waiting for all my life. I'm so glad you're my one, yeah. You're the one I've been searching for all my life. Hey girl, it's you. I'm your benevolence. I'll never leave you alone and show your negligence. It doesn't matter You're the one I've been searching for all my life. See me floating on cloud nine, dancing on the rainbow. 'Cause I love you. See me floating on cloud nine, dancing on the rainbow. Now how can I make you overstand? Out of all those girls, you're the one. I'll be that man, I'll be the right man, even when the baby's the friend. You're the one I've been waiting for all my life. I'm so glad you're my wife. You're the one I've been searching for all my life. Jah never fails, he always answers my cry. Because I pray for an angel, and I've been blessed by the Most High. Like a fairy tale, happily ever after, never die. The simplicity of your actions really opened my eyes. You're the one.
Now we're going to pick up where we left off, back to the divinity of the Black African woman. So we're going to get a little bit more detailed with regard to the 7 distinctive haplogroups that makes up the Black African woman and her uniqueness. Okay, so we're going to deal with this on the cosmological and spiritual level now, because we dealt with it physically and genetically, but now we're going to deal with it cosmologically and spiritually, and what it means and what it represents on the mundane and on the spiritual plane. Now, what we have in front of us is the Pleiades. In astronomy, the Pleiades, or 7 sisters, is an open star cluster containing middle-aged, hot-B-type stars located in the constellation of Taurus. It is among the nearest star clusters to Earth, and it is the cluster most obvious to the naked eye in the night sky. The celestial entity has several meanings in different cultures and traditions. Now, I know you notice the 7 sisters or star clusters corresponding to the 7 indigenous African haplogroups of our African sisters that binds and connects our African sisters. So I know a lot of you might be saying, what does this have to do with genetics? What does this have to do with genes? What does Pleiades have to do with DNA? What does Pleiades have to do with African woman? But we're going to get into several of those different cultures and traditions to see where these things actually derive from. And what we're going to find out is that our people was at the basis and foundations of these cultures and traditions as well. Yes, 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 yes. A lot of times we read and don't even see. A lot of times we talk and don't even walk. So what we're going to do is talk the talk, walk the walk, read and see, and destroy all the blindfold believers out there that are rooted in religion that has been indoctrinated and programmed to hate themselves. Now, what we just witnessed was the book of Revelation and dealing with the seven spirits of God, so to speak. Okay, so we dealing with the seven spirits. Those seven spirits actually correspond to the seven haplogroups that belong to the African woman indigenously. So that's haplogroup L0, L1, L2, L3, L4, L5, and L6. That's seven. We know that seven is a set apart number. We know that seven also represents completion. So what we're dealing with now is the cosmological implications of the number seven, but not just any old number, but its actual representation on the planet Earth and in the so-called heavens corresponding with a particular star system, quote unquote Pleiades, and then the constellation Taurus. Now this even gets a little bit deeper because a lot of people don't even understand where the Greeks got the whole seven star clusters regarding Pleiades come from. A lot of people don't even know where these implications come from in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation, we know that it's a symbolic book that's rooted in cosmology, aka astrology, and aka astrotheology, dealing with the cycles of time based on the seasonal changes. Now, people forecasted those particular things by misappropriating African culture and now calling it prophecy or calling it signs of the times. But anything that's quote unquote prophecy is still nothing but a cycle within the confines of the same season, because everything is cyclical in nature. We have reproduction, we have things that die off, we have the winter time, then we have the spring, we're dealing with rebirth. So this is what this is actually talking about. Now, what we're going to do now is show the actual origins of these cosmological principles, concepts, and understanding. So this is where our ancestors come into play and being the ones that's responsible for birthing or giving birth or giving truth to the world as it pertains to the cosmos. The same people, the silly Negroes out there who are religified, who are indoctrinated and inculcated under the same Eurasian religions that they don't even understand themselves because they haven't sifted through the data, they haven't investigated beyond the text and went to the actual sources of their ancestors and weighed in to see whether what's in the Bible is true or not, or at least try to find a mean so you can have a barometer to determine or a reference point to see whether somebody's lying or whether something is misappropriated, whether something was mistranslated. And that's not enough, because if you're not going to the primary sources, you can't tell where those things come from. You trying to interpret the biblical narrative from the Bible is called a logical fallacy, because the Bible does not stand on itself by itself. It does not stand on its legs by its own. The Bible comes from somewhere. There's texts, there's records, there's papyruses where this particular story is coming from, where it's being inspired from. It's being inspired by people. It's being inspired from somewhere. It did not just manifest out of nowhere. It did not just fall out the sky. There's an actual true historical origins to these particular texts. And there's no way you'll be able to understand that if you're not vetting the sources, if you're not conferring with your ancestors, if you're not consulting with primary sources, if you're not consulting with inscriptions, if you're not consulting with epigraphy. You need to become a researcher. The scripture tells you, my people perish for the lack of knowledge. But yet I don't see nobody going out their way to make sure they investigate beyond these religious texts that we know the white man had his hand on for thousands of years. How do you know these texts are pure? How do you know they're untainted? I'm just showing you right now that we don't come from Eurasia, but yet the text tells you we come from Eurasia. But you're going to look at me and say, I'm an outcast, I'm a Satanist, I'm a demon, I'm a Hamite worshiper, and all this nonsense and foolishness that they've indoctrinated you with to believe in about your own people, calling them Hamites and all of this type of stuff, calling them pagans and heathens, which goes to show you're so misled and don't have no understanding. But what we're going to do now is resurrect the ancestors so they can speak for themselves, because I don't need to speak, because I'm just a vessel for the Most High and them. So now we're going to get into the book, the Akrawa complex, the soul of Akanfo, and we're going to read something in the book that's going to correspond to the 7 sisters or the 7 daughters of so-called Pleiades. Now we're going to show you where this actually derives from. The Abusua abosom and Untoru abosom are related to the Hai and Habia. There are 7 major Mamasukuo, great matricircle matrilineal clans in Akan culture. Mamasua is the plural of Abusua. If one cannot trace his or her ancestry to one of the 7 great ancestries of these Mamasukuo, then one is not a Khan. Let me read that again. If one cannot trace his or her ancestry to one of the 7 great ancestries of these Mamasukuo, then one is not a Khan. The 7 major Mamasukuo are Asana, Agana, Aduana, Ekuana, Esseni, Ebrituo, and Asikirieri. There are also variations of these names and subgroups born of these clans. These 7 Mamasukuo are headed by 7 great ancestresses and governed by 7 female abosom. Now, if some of you out there might not know what an abosom is the equivalent for the Yoruba Orisha, in the Igbo Orusi, in the Fon and Iwe tradition, the Vodun. Okay? So, we're talking about 7 great divinities in the Akan culture that is responsible for their matricircle or their matrilineal clans, which they say they derive from. So here we have an attestation from the Akan ethnic group themselves telling you what these particular things that we were just talking about concerning the Pleiades star cluster or the 7 daughters or the 7 sisters of Pleiades mean and originated. So the Akan is the larger ethnic group from which the Ashanti derives from. A lot of people are familiar with the Ashanti, but they don't realize the Ashanti belongs to a larger meta-ethnic group called the Akan, which gave rise to varying subtribes. The Ashanti is just another subtribe of the Akan larger ethnic group. So that is their ethnic group. This also gives further credence and promise to the macro haplogroup L that all indigenous African women belongs to. So not only are we proven on a cosmological scale the basis of reality that makes up our people and our divinity, but also we're proven through attestation from tradition that's kept in West Africa today by the Akan ethnic group, which has to do with a lot of our ancestors who came over here because they were one of the larger ethnic groups that were enslaved and sent over here in the diaspora in the Americas. So we have an attestation from an ancestral account that's saying that these great African ancestresses, these great African women do exist, not only in a philosophical way, not only in a cosmological way or a celestial way, but also in an ethnic way predicated on where they come from and where they originated. So let's continue with our investigation. Now, so here we're looking at the Per M. Heru, page 148, the Papyrus of Ani, the so-called Egyptian Book of the Dead, as white Egyptologists calls it. And now, if you look closely to the right, what you're going to see is 7 columns of 7 cows with sun disk over their heads. Now, let's count the columns with the cows with the sun disk over their heads. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, some of you might be saying, oh my goodness, here we go with the number 7 again. And what does these 7 cows actually represent in this particular mural? Okay, so these 7 cows with the sun disk over their head in ancient Nile Valley civilization and culture is called Het Heru. Okay, she's the so-called goddess or divinity of fertility, reproduction, procreation. Okay, she deals with sexual attraction for the purpose of procreation. She also operates through the planet Venus. So we're back in the book, the Akrawa Complex, Soul of Akanfo by Kwesi Ra Nehimpata Akan. Above, another depiction of the 7 Het Heru abosom. These 7 female abosom actually governs the 7 Akan ancestresses who had the 7 Umsuakuo matricircular clans. In ancient Kemet, the 7 Het Heru are shown to be present at the birth of the child to announce the child's fate or Shayet Habiya. The constellation called Pleiades in European languages is called the 7 Het Heru in Kemet, 7 Hathors, which is another rendition of Het Heru. In Akan, this constellation of 7 major stars is called Aburawi Nane Ma, the eldresses, old woman, and her children. Okay, so there we have it in the Akan culture again, an attestation to the facts that we've been laying throughout the entire presentation, cosmologically, etc., etc., etc. So here we're looking at the actual 7 Het Heru abosom, or the 7 Het Heru divinities, or Untoru or Untorutu. And as you can see, there you see right there, primary source, right there, family. We cannot make this stuff up. I mean, we've exhausted this whole thing, man, and I think we've done a pretty good job showing and proving beyond a shadow of a doubt the Black African woman's divinity on the cosmological scale and on the mundane and spiritual level as well. So this is a beautiful thing to bear witness to. Nothing spooky, just straight cosmology, dealing with knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that's rooted in actual gnosis or knowing. And again, this is from the Stele of Priest Amenemhat, so you could go check that out. So Venus governs Taurus, and Taurus is symbolized by the bull. What's interesting about the bull is that Het Heru is called the divine cow, which is the feminine counterpart to the bull, because she actually governs that specific aspect in the celestial heaven. She's actually called the great chieftainess of the heavens. So now you know and see where the Greeks is getting all this inspiration from concerning the Pleiades star system and the 7 daughters or the 7 sisters of Pleiades. This derives from our ancestors, family. Everything that we see or learn about on this earth has a meaning, has an origin, and has a reason. It has a purpose. Nothing happens by chance. Information and knowledge just don't come out of nowhere. These things are ancient and they go back tens of thousands of years. And what we're going to prove in the African origins in the ancient Israelite presentation is that our ancestors derived from the beginning of the Nile, and we were the progenitors of Nile Valley civilization and culture. And this is why people cannot explain how West Africans have traditions like Vodun, the Iwe and the Faun, or Arusi, the Igbo, or Abosom, or Orisha worship, the Yoruba. They cannot explain these things. Not only can they explain these things, but we can actually make the one-to-one correspondences across West Africa and Central Africa with every single divinity and deity that originated in Nile Valley civilization and culture. Okay, so now we're going to get back into an article that we were actually